The dam is breaking. The cover-up is crumbling. The interest in this subject is skyrocketing. Skepticism is finally, the ridicule, fear, and confusion and debunking surrounding this subject is going by the wayside. I always tell everyone, if you're seeing a UFO, first thing you should do is get another witness, because that can change everything. He woke up and saw, standing in his doorway, two, I'm not going to call them grays, but they were sort of half gray, half human, wearing jumpsuits, green jumpsuits, he said, skin tight with red sleeves, or, around the tip of the sleeve, and a red collar. One was slightly taller than the other. One was about 6 feet tall. The other was 5.5, and pale skin. And he was, again, very struck by their eyes. Now, this frightened him badly. He was absolutely on the edge of terror and panic seeing these guys. But instantly, one of them stepped forward and said, "We're not here to hurt you." And he said exactly what so many other contactees have said. He says, "I felt a love like never before. Just tell me, what is this?" The doctor looked at him, looked up, looked at the x-ray, looked up at him with this really somber expression, and got up and closed the door to his office so that no one could hear, sat down at his desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a document. Now, this I have never heard before.
Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Welcome everyone to Higher Journeys. Hope you're having a great day. Really excited to share with you what I am calling today UFOs, implants, and bloodlines, what they're not telling us. Now, I want to tell you right now, y'all, please stay to the end, because first of all, you're going to want to hear from my guest. I'll tell you in just a second who that is. But at the end, we've got something that I have never heard before. I don't know that you have either. And we want to go through a sequence so you will hear exactly what I had not heard and what they aren't telling us. So without further ado, I want to bring on my guest. This is none other than Mr. Preston Dennett, at long last. Do y'all know that face? You know that name? You should if you're following the UFO field. He's been at it for, my God, decades. I think, Preston, you said 1986 is
right.
when you kind of got started. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, that's when I started my career in journalism in sports broadcasting. That's a long time ago. So you've been at this a long time. You've written 32 books. 32 books. And the latest one we're going to talk about today is called Humanoids and High Strangeness, 20 True UFO Encounters. So, Mr. Dennett, welcome to the show finally.
Thank you, Alexis. It's an honor and a delight. Thank you.
Oh, at long last. Well, listen, as things are heating up in the UFO discussion, let's just say, it's been nonstop. And I really do think we're on the precipice of something. Not quite sure what that is. But despite, or I should say, in addition to all that we're hearing on what I call the more mechanistic side of things, that being the cover-up primarily, the whistleblowers coming forward, the crash retrievals et al., the experiencer side of this to me remains the most, not only elusive, but the most intriguing and frankly the most important of this whole UFO ET phenomenon. So, Preston, we're gonna have you talk about some of those 20 stories. We can't get into all of them, obviously, but we picked 4 stories, you guys, that I thought would be really, really. They're all intriguing, but these 4 in particular are incredible in terms of the both the sort of in your face and the nuanced aspects of what this contact entailed. So I'm going to start with a man that we both are aware of, Sebastian Bulos from Peru. If you're listening or watching, Sebastian, hello, my friend. It's been a long time. When I found out that you were actually featured in Preston's book, Humanoids and High Strangers, I said, wow. Not surprised, though. Tell us, let's start by getting right into his story, because there's a lot going on there. Give us the lowdown on what happened to Sebastian.
Yeah, Sebastian, what a lovely guy. I mean, really just super intelligent, very kind. Reached out to me because he'd been watching my YouTube channel to share his story and agreed to an interview. And boy, was I glad he did, because his story is very extensive and quite unusual. He is, if I remember correctly, from Peru, Lima, Peru. And it was November 2013 that he had his first real wake-up call to this subject. His parents had some UFO sightings. His mom in particular had a very close-up sighting when she was a young woman. with a classic flying saucer right overhead. So he was certainly aware of this subject, but hadn't thought too much about it, hoped one day to see a UFO. And that happened in a really unusual way. I think it was November 5, 2013. He was in his home in Lima, Peru, and started getting this vision, this sort of clairvoyant vision in his head of this beautiful kind of orange glowing, not quite a rectangle, it had curved edges. But what was so interesting is he was looking down on it from above. This was a glowing orange object. And looking from above, in his mind, he could see that it was over Lima, Peru, north of him. So he knew this location. He wasn't quite in that location, but it was close to him. He's like, wow, this is odd. And he watched this thing in his head moving closer and closer to him. He's like, this looks like it's going to come over my house. So this was so unusual. And as it got closer and closer, he finally heard this voice in his head which said, Mira el cielo, look at the sky.
The sky, yeah.
Which is so cool. He speaks English and, of course, Spanish, I believe, is what they speak in Peru. Yeah. So he rushes outside and sees this object, just like he had seen it visual or telepathically, I guess. But now he's seeing it visually, and it's pretty high up there, but not so high up there that he can't see somebody inside of it. He said it was mostly silhouette, but it was this beautiful human-looking figure, muscular. He said the best way he could describe it is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. You may know the sketch with the arms outstretched and the legs spread wide. He says it was a long, thin, muscular person, did not appear to have any clothes on. He couldn't tell. And the only real difference from Leonardo da Vinci's sketch is instead of the arms outstretched by the side, they were forward in a supplicating kind of gesture. And he says as soon as he saw this figure, this overwhelming sense of love just poured through him. It's almost as if he was levitating. His chest was rising up. It was so powerful, it kind of scared him a little bit. He'd never felt this kind of love. This really intrigued me because I've heard contactees say this exact thing. The sense of love coming from these beings is unconditional.
Yeah. Jake Barber talked about that. Many people have, but most recently, it's not to interrupt you, but yeah, just inexplicable love. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so beautiful. And, he's such a kind, open-hearted man.
Yes.
As he's explaining this, you can see, the tears in his eyes and how profoundly it affected him. Because, again, this is kind of his first experience with all of this.
Right.
And it's a pretty big one. So he's watching this in absolute thunderstruck awe as it's going slowly overhead and quite close, again, close enough to see this figure. So unusual. I have not heard a story quite like this. Goes overhead and he's like, you know what? I need to get another witness. I always tell everyone, if you're seeing a UFO, first thing you should do is get another witness because that can change everything. If you can get multiple witnesses, it's great to have that kind of confirmation because an encounter can make you absolutely question your own eyes, question everything. It's very challenging, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So he did what, the right thing, I think. Ran inside, got his roommate and told her to come outside. He's hysterical, screaming, UFO, UFO, UFO. And she's like, what is wrong with you? So finally, he gets her to come outside. And by this point, it is fairly distant enough where you can't see the humanoid anymore. And he watched her face just completely change. Her expression went to complete shock. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's a UFO. She's like, I'm telling you. And she's like, wow. And so here's where it gets really interesting. They turn to go inside. He goes inside. He follows her, I believe, inside, closes the door, and they look at the clock. And, this was afternoon. It is now dark. He turned and looked at her in shock. She did not seem to notice any missing time. He didn't really ask her about it. He was in such shock to see that it was dark outside. But now, now looking back, he's like, wow, this is missing time. He did not know what that meant. So it's very likely that he had a more extensive or deeper levels of contact.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Never went under hypnosis or anything like that. But this certainly marked the beginning of a number of really incredible events.
Absolutely. Well, you go into it. I want to just point out a couple of things that stood out to me, kind of stood me on my ear. He talks about a mysterious elderly twin men speaking in a sort of metallic voice, telepathically, of course. I say of course because I don't know that I've heard of any encounters that were not telepathic in nature. But talk about that. That's at a bus stop, I think he was at.
Yeah, and this was not long after this. At this time, he was quite poor. He had lost his job as a tour guide and would later become an English teacher. But he wasn't eating a lot of meat because meat's expensive. So he's on a vegetarian diet, doing a lot of meditation. He's a very spiritual guy. He thinks this is significant, and I agree, because often, spiritual meditation can open you up to these kinds of things. So at any rate, he's going to the bus stop, and there's a number of people there. But what really catches his eye are these two elderly men who look identical. They're dressed the same. They're normal looking for the most part, except they're wearing almost the same clothes. I think one had a different colored jacket on, but looked a little unusual in that they were pretty much identical. But he says their eyes were also hypnotic a little bit. People always talk about the eyes. That's kind of a dead giveaway. I think there are a number of cases that are pretty convincing of ETs walking among us. He certainly really hadn't heard about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's looking at them. This is when he hears them talking. And this was the really unusual part that I think gave him pause, because they weren't moving their lips. And this is when he realized, oh my gosh, I'm hearing this. They're talking to each other in this almost metallic, robotic language that he doesn't fully understand. I don't believe that this was, Spanish. I'd have to
I was
look
just
back.
going to ask you, did he, was it
I
in
think it was
his
another
native tongue?
language. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Well, I had to ask him that. Sebastian let us know. Wow. There were a couple
So,
of, I mean, there's so many, this guy, you guys had, in all the research, years of research that I've done, I have never heard so many, just a collection of truly, when you talk about high strangeness, Preston, you aren't kidding. One of them is appearance of a black hooded flying humanoid resembling a monk or even Yoda. That also showed up on a very synchronized schedule every 5 days, 5 minutes apart. A humanoid landing near his house, seemingly phasing through a wall. Of course, we've heard of those sorts of things before. It's still not what you can consider normal, but within the contact encounter space it is. And then talk about Preston traveling from Mexico back to his home country, and this tall white blonde human woman with turquoise eyes that did something. Why don't you share that? That's crazy as well.
yeah, he had become incredibly intuitive, having some ghost encounters and clairvoyant episodes, premonitions. So he had become very, very intuitive, and was at the airport and immediately noticed this somewhat odd-looking woman. She was human, but very pale skin, very cosmopolitan, kind of, is how he put it, in her look and behavior, and walked right by him. And he just thought, this lady is not normal. This lady looks like an ET. Again, he remarked upon her eyes and her unusual beauty. She had slightly different looking face. And he thought to himself, that's an ET. At which point she turned and looked at him, which was to him a level of confirmation and really made him wonder about it. And he's sitting down with his friend, was like pointing out this woman. He's like, do you see this woman? He's like, yeah, I see her. She's really unusual. And his friend's like, well, yeah, she is. And her behavior was unusual because she's walking back and forth somewhat close to him. Now, this is when he starts to have a problem with Air Force security. He's never had a problem before. He's traveled quite a bit. And he's pulled out of line into a room to be questioned, which terrified him, because this was he was becoming very active in the UFO scene. He's like wondering, oh my gosh, is this connected to that?
Right.
Are they questioning me? They're being very tight-lipped about even why they're questioning him, asking him all kinds of questions about why he's visiting. Does he have money? How long is he planning on staying? What's the purpose for his visit? But right before all of this happened, this lady walks right up close to him, and he felt this connection to her, where he felt like she was there to protect him, like she was watching over him, like she was one of these guys, these ETs that he had become really connected to.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's an interesting story, and I only put a lot of credence to it because he kept having so many of these earlier experiences.
Right.
And I have no
Well,
doubt they do walk among us. I mean, there are some that look just like us.
oh, I have to tell you, and I'd love to hear from you guys out there listening, if you think you've run into a being and an individual that you have just questioned. I have on several occasions, and again, there's no way you could say emphatically, oh, this is a humanoid or non-human intelligence, but and it's more, Preston, I think, than just the way they look. There's almost an instinctual sense that we might pick up, just to maybe the hairs are raising up on your arms, or you just have that sort of gut feeling, and maybe they'll glance at you and as if they're picking up that you're recognizing them. I've heard that said before as well. Is it, again, it's a telepathic.
There's four things that I've noticed. One is they're dressed a little unusual.
Yeah, a little awkward.
Second is they look a little unusual. Third is their behavior can be a little unusual. Some of the questions they might ask or the things they're doing. But fourth, it's like you said, the intuitive connection.
Absolutely.
People feel like they're telepathically communicating often.
Right.
So these are the things I would recommend looking for.
Absolutely.
If you have this kind of experience.
Yeah. I wouldn't say necessarily look for it, but let your intuition be your guide. I think places like airports, places where there are crowds, maybe at fairs or UFO conferences. We're going to be going to one
anywhere.
soon. It can happen anywhere, grocery store.
Yeah, gas stations, schools, grocery stores, bus stations.
Absolutely. Church.
Restaurants.
Yep.
There is a case in a church I know of, yep.
Well, Richard Dolan had spoken about that. He gave me an interview years ago about we won't go into it now, but a situation where a woman could swear that the two tall, beautiful, exceedingly beautiful individuals sitting in the front pew in front of her were, in fact, that. Yeah. You've got Ingo Swann's story, of course, that's famously documented in his book.
At the grocery store.
At the grocery store. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, the name of the book is escaping me right now. It'll come back to me. Penetration. Absolutely. So yes, they're all over the place. It's really quite stunning. And I'll tell you somebody else, you guys, that recently came out on a major talk show and brought it up. And that's none other than Lawrence Fishburne. He said emphatically that he believes that aliens walk among us. I don't know if he used the word alien, but the beings walk amongst us. So, this is, before we go to the next story, Preston, I want your opinion on, we're obviously slowly going through that, the arc that I thought would be so long before we get to the D word, disclosure, however that will happen. But it feels to me as if there's been some form of an acceleration, I would say, in the last 12 months or so. What are your thoughts on that? I'd love to get your thoughts before we move on.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I feel like this is a subject whose time has come. We've collected such an enormous database. So many people are having encounters that it's sort of become, I don't know how I would put it, the cover up. The dam is breaking. The cover up is crumbling. The interest in this subject is skyrocketing. Skepticism is finally, the ridicule, fear, and confusion and debunking surrounding the subject is going by the wayside. So I think this is a really interesting time for all humanity, really, as this subject is going mainstream. Mm-hmm. And I'm super excited about it.
I am too. And it may have its flaws. And I'm always dubious about what the narrative is driving us toward. But I still feel that ultimately, regardless of, let's just say that there was a faction that is being very meticulous about the narrative for their own end or means to an end, it still somehow, Preston, takes on something universal that's out of their hands. And I think that's happening in any case. I really feel optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Let's move on and talk about Hector. Help me pronounce the last name. Sawayak, is it?
I always pronounced it Sawiak, but
Sawiak. Okay.
Nope.
Hector. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Healing story. This is an incredible story of healing. Not the first I've heard of alien interaction and miraculous healing on shortly thereafter or right on the spot. Tell us about Hector's story in that regard.
Yeah. Well, he reached out to me because I've done an enormous amount of research on healing cases. And he was looking for information, and my name kept coming up. I've written a full-length book about it, The Healing Power of UFOs. And I'm so glad he reached out to me, because this is a very credible witness, a really interesting gentleman who is a manager of the largest bank, actually, in Argentina, a private pilot. He holds multiple degrees. I mean, this guy is amazingly intelligent. Never had a UFO encounter, but there was sightings in the news in his area. So he became quite interested about this. And he thought, I want to see a UFO. And, where he lived, oh gosh, the name of his town escapes me. But at any rate, he decided to go out of the town where there's all kinds of light pollution into the mountains and try to call down a UFO. So in essence, this is a close encounter of the fifth kind that he's trying to initiate an encounter. And he brought his binoculars and camera and flashlights and so forth, and was so disappointed because pretty early in the night, the clouds rolled in and he didn't see anything. And he thought, well, darn, I really wanted to see a UFO. But I think he did the right thing, because he put that message out there. This is how close encounters of the fifth kind work. And I really think the most effective method is consciousness, reaching out to the ETs, who are profoundly telepathic. Yes. And it worked for him, because it was a few months later that he's lying in bed. Mind you, this is like an apartment building. And here's his name being called in his head telepathically. It woke him up. And of course, he's looking around his apartment for a sec, hears his name again, and for some reason, he's not exactly sure why, runs to his window just in time to see this incredible UFO arc across the sky, a bright, blazing orange light. And being a pilot, he can recognize that this is not an aircraft, a conventional aircraft. It was moving far too quickly, but was far too slow to be a meteor. I mean, this was in view for a good 10 seconds as it arced all the way from horizon to horizon. So he's like very profoundly struck by this, in particular because it called him outside. He heard his name being called. Mm-hmm. And so this really just changed his complete outlook on things. Like, I saw my UFO, and he kind of thought that was going to be the end of it, but it wasn't, because it was not long after that. This is all, in the space of a few months. He woke up and saw, standing in his doorway, two, I'm not going to call them grays, but they were sort of half gray, half human, wearing jumpsuits, green jumpsuits, he said, skin tight with red sleeves, or around the tip of the sleeve, and a red collar. One was slightly taller than the other. One was about 6 feet tall. The other was 5.5, and pale skin. And he was again very struck by their eyes. Now this frightened him badly. He was absolutely on the edge of terror and panic seeing these guys. But instantly, one of them stepped forward and said, "We're not here to hurt you." And he said exactly what so many other contactees have said. He says, "I felt a love like never before." Direct quote.
And that's what you call the chapter, right? A love like never before.
Yeah, which I thought was just lovely, because there is so much fear surrounding this subject. And I certainly understand, witnesses who have an encounter and, have that really strong fear reaction. Seeing something that's completely out of your worldview is an incredible shock.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it certainly was for him. But he instantly sensed this just loving kindness, this nurturing from them.
Right.
And, they said, "No, we're not here to hurt you. We're here to heal you."
Yeah.
Now he's a young man, active, in sports, fishing and skiing and all this stuff. He's quite healthy, actually, works out. So this puzzled him a little bit. But they pulled out a little brown triangular pill about a half-inch in diameter and handed it to him and said, "We'd like you to swallow this, to eat this." And he was just absolutely convinced of their honesty and sincerity and genuine loving kindness, and had no problem. He put it in his mouth. He said it was quite bitter, and swallowed it. And one of them was actually holding his head in a very gentle way.
Holding Hector's head?
Right. Holding his head in a just absolutely nurturing way. And he is so overcome with emotion that his eyes are tearing. He can feel them just pouring out down the side of his head. And the next thing he knows, he loses consciousness and wakes up, and it's the next morning. He does have a wife, who's sleeping with him in bed. She did not see anything. He has children. He told them the whole story, and they kind of looked at him like, oh, okay. But being a very close family, they absolutely supported him. God bless them for that.
Thank goodness, yeah.
But they didn't hold the kind of interest that he had in the subject. And this is, of course, something a lot of contactees struggle with. People don't fully understand unless they've had this experience.
Mm-hmm.
He says he was a little nauseous for 3 days. There were no other real effects from them. But he wonders, perhaps something was going to manifest and they healed it. 'Cause that does turn up. People will say, "I'm not sick." And they're like, "Oh, well, you would be."
Isn't that something?
One guy I interviewed had a brain tumor. They told him, he says, "I have no symptoms." And they said, "Oh, you will. You would die from this if we did not take care of this." Most healing cases, people are sick. And sometimes, most often, ETs will cure them right before they have surgery or a doctor's visit. But this was a beautiful healing encounter and very benevolent and friendly.
We are living at a time of great challenge and incredible opportunity. A time when taking life into our own hands, charting our own course, and finding our own answers is more accessible than ever before. During this time, you may be asking yourself, what am I called to do? What if I could discover not only my own inner healing power, but help others all over this planet discover theirs? We all have the ability to heal ourselves, but it takes a special approach, a unique approach. Quantum healing hypnosis technique, also known as QHHT, a method developed by pioneering hypnotherapist and past life regression expert Dolores Cannon, is the approach that thousands have used and taught to access the deeper aspect of the self for healing at the core level. We all have the ability to tap into the higher self, the oversoul, the higher consciousness, and we have the means to help others to do the same. QHHT is designed to help the individual access the subconscious, the storehouse of all information, through visualization at the deepest level imaginable, a process that Dolores Cannon discovered and refined during her decades of working with individuals from around the globe. Training with QHHT will provide the guidance and give you the tools to help others tap that incredible force within. Now, you can access this exclusive training online, bringing the tools needed right to you, so you can assist others in finding their own answers and achieve total healing. This is powerful and needed now more than ever. Be a part of the pioneering work and legacy of Dolores Cannon by learning QHHT. Start today by clicking on the link in the description of this show to get started. And when you do, don't forget to mention Higher Journeys to get a 10% course discount when you sign up. It's time we all take back control of our lives and chart the course for success at every level. It's time to discover the power of quantum healing hypnosis technique by helping others to help themselves. And by doing this, we are helping to heal the world. That's incredible. I can share a story and I can share it publicly because Michael J.S. Carter, named Preston, I'm sure you know, has talked about his miraculous healing quite a few years ago now. He actually gave me the story as well quite a few years ago of his having a blood clot in, I believe, his left leg. He said that his left leg looked like LeBron James's leg. And to make a long story short, went to the doctor. The doctor immediately wanted to do intervention, scheduled him for a surgery. But just before the surgery, guess what happened? He had a visit. And I won't go into all the detail. You guys can, maybe I can put a link where you can watch that particular episode. It's profound. And Preston, he said that this being that came into the room was not described as a gray, but something different, almost very muscular and overpowering sort of figure, woke him up, pointed a blue beam in his abdomen, and he blacked out after that. Well, the next morning he woke up and sure enough, blood clot gone. Went to the doctor. Doctor obviously was confounded. What happened here? So there's, I could tell you several cases of, in fact, a client of mine, and I'm not going to get into that because it's quite personal, but also had a healing that she believed was alien related.
Yeah, it's shocking how many there are. I documented over 300, and I can double that now. I did speak with Michael Carter. What a
Okay,
lovely
so you know the
man.
story. Do you know the
I
story?
do.
Okay,
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah, he's become a good friend. And not the only case of a blood clot healing that I have. You name an illness or a condition, I bet you I could find a case. Certainly, I mean, there's a lot that goes on with humans, but it's amazing how long the list is of
It's
conditions people have
amazing.
been healed of.
It's amazing, but I know we've got a couple more stories to go here, but I want to pause here for a minute. I started to call you Hector Preston because, as we hear these stories, and we've combined, obviously you've taken in a lot more stories than I have, but I've done my fair share. You hear such a variation of styles of encounters, if you will. There are those that are described as hellish and just incredibly disturbing, where others, people talk about this overwhelming feeling of love and healing. Then there's the paradox where there's a little bit of both going on. There's, like you said, it could be simply because just the shock of seeing something so unfamiliar is enough to shoot you into a form of PTSD. I believe, I'm going to say it, I believe Michael Carter, he's, bless his heart, he's been very courageous in talking about the fear and still coping with that. So there's a paradox going on. Just give me your thoughts on all of that. And it's not an easy question to answer, but what's your thought after?
Yeah, I mean, you're not kidding when you say that's not easy. It's certainly a controversial aspect of all this because there are those who feel like their encounters were negative, unpleasant. There's certainly a bell curve there of people who had very negative, fearful encounters and those who were incredibly positive. And I can tell you, having interviewed well over hundreds of people who've had face-to-face contact with humanoids of one kind or another or been taken on board, most have had a lot of fear with this difficulty, especially in the beginning, and described, PTSD, nightmares, insomnia, real difficulty processing this. But as their lives go on and the encounters continue, the vast majority of them have told me that no, they don't think ETs are evil, trying to hurt, scare, or harm, or take over, or anything like that, and say that they wouldn't trade their experiences for anything, that they've really gotten a lot out of it.
Yeah.
I think some of the negative encounters that are, quote, horrific are probably not ET at all.
Mm.
I'm certainly not going to gaslight people who, my encounter was negative, because I've interviewed people and I wrote about them in my books. Mm-hmm. They did not like their experiences.
Right.
But I do think, and I think the more I do research, the clearer this is. When someone has a strong fear reaction, they are not able to perceive as correctly or as clearly as if you did not have fear. So I've talked to people who've had identical encounters in detail, and one labeled it horrifically negative, demonic, and the other's like, well, gosh, mine was fine. So fear plays an incredibly strong role, as does our belief system.
Right. So you're saying a predisposition for being, let's say, if a person's jumpy or just tends to get scared easily. I mean,
Well, I think honestly, it's the cover-up that's playing a huge role here. The media, who has portrayed this subject in a very negative way.
Yeah.
And we've been trained to fear from a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much disinformation and confusion and fear surrounding this subject that it's very difficult to get to the truth. But I can tell you, and I always encourage people to do this, take a good objective look at the onboard UFO encounter. The worst I get from people is the physical exam, which can be very frightening. People don't like to go to the doctor anyway.
Mm.
And when it's an ET doing it, it's the loss of control, I think. The ETs appearing in their bedroom, the whole shock of the experience in the beginning that makes this a mixed bag for quite a few people. But the sequence of events is very clear. People are taken on board and examined, and this is when they're often healed. This essentially is a checkup. But they will give you a tour of the craft. This is important because this shows, I think, very clearly that they're not here to hurt people. What happens to people is they'll take you down to the engine room, explain how the craft works. They'll take you up to the control room, the helm, sometimes sit you in the pilot seat and explain how they fly the craft.
Absolutely.
Almost always psychically. They'll
I
take you to an real quick.
yeah.
And they'll take you to an observation deck, show you a star field or the Earth or the moon. They will give you personal messages about your life, how to help you, about upcoming events perhaps in your life. Almost always people will get warnings about nuclear proliferation, war, pollution, destruction of the environment, greed and corruption. They will emphasize the importance of psychic development. It's a rare contactee that isn't psychically awakened. They will say very clearly that we are you, you are us, we share a common heritage. So if you look at the sequence of events, it's very telling. It's very important. But it's getting past the fear that is the real challenge here.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I wanted to jump in because everything that you've said, I drive with. As a matter of fact, you guys, Preston was so kind to give me some of his incredible knowledge that I was able to incorporate into my upcoming lecture for Contact in the Desert. A little plug. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But what a wealth of knowledge you have, and because of the scores and scores of people that you have interviewed over decades, if there's anyone that can come up with a consensus of what's happening, you certainly can. But I wanted to point out this idea. This is where I got a little anxious. The idea of, you have heard scores of people talk about not only being brought on board, but being shown how to fly the craft. Preston, why do you think that is?
Because I think one of the main missions of ETs is to educate, is to announce their presence, is to lift people up to a higher level of wisdom and knowledge and awareness. And it's curious to me. I can only speculate to a certain degree, and I think contactees who had this experience can certainly speak with firsthand knowledge of this. But it's my assessment that it's purely a desire to educate people and make them aware that these craft are actually living beings, and this is how they fly these craft, which is psychically. Grant Cameron's book, Sky Pilots, highly recommended. He lays this out in black and white. It's amazing to me. It's a really cool experience for people, and I think it gives them a real insight into why the ETs are here, how advanced they are, and what their, I hate that word agenda, what their goal is, their mission with us.
This also begs the question, as I have gotten into some deep research on the intergenerational component, which is what I will be speaking about at Contact. When we see how vested it seems so many of these beings are in us, in the things that you're talking about, begs the question for me, Preston, could it be more about educating us as a species, but perhaps educating some of us that they feel responsible for the genetics for? Let's just go all the way there. I mean, that's a big one to consider, but when you think of someone who, the people in your life that are so intent on nurturing and teaching you, it's who? Our family. Have you thought about it from that perspective?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I kind of approach it this way. There's been a lot of studies of how common contact is.
Yes,
And,
indeed.
Gale and Hynek said 1 in 40. I heard that. I'm like, no way. I would know someone who's been taken on board. And of course I did.
Mhm.
I think we all know, about 40 people easily. And of course the Roper survey, which
Yes.
is a objective survey company, found 1 in 50. So my point is, this is quite common. And
Mhm.
if we all know one, you know, or know 40 people, one of them being a contactee, well, this is a very effective way of introducing this subject to all society. Because all it takes is that one person to sort of spread the message. ETs are absolutely interested in certain family lines. We know this.
Yes, indeed.
And I think what they're doing here is contacting people, because I did notice this pattern, who are, the shakers and movers, good people in society. I was really doing a lot of deep, research on this. I'm like, why this person and not that person? And when I finally interviewed this lady from Norway, I asked her what she did for a living. She said, I do human and animal rights work. That rang a bell for me because Michael Carter, he works against racism. John Hunter Gray, award-winning social worker. So I started looking at the jobs of all the people I've interviewed, and so many nurses,
Mhm.
doctors, inventors, uh, healers of all kinds, environmentalists, people doing good work in any capacity. So I think what's going on here, generationally speaking, is ETs are sort of upholding the best of our genetic lines. Uh, and I don't know if I would call it experimenting, as some people do, but
Mm.
doing what any person would do, trying to produce the best offspring, bring the best out of each person.
Sure.
So it's again another, to me, sign that they're very concerned about
Yeah.
helping us. One
Yeah.
case, if I may, real briefly, 30 seconds,
Absolutely. Go for
is,
it.
is a gentleman from Gainesville, Florida, who was being contacted by Grays and didn't like it at first, but they kept coming. He got over his fear. He had a hernia. They came and he's like, if you're going to contact me, heal my hernia, which they did with a little handheld instrument. And he asked them, why are you contacting me? And they said, well, we're interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. That struck a chord with him because his grandfather was 105 and doing well. He has longevity in his family, big time. Aunts, his mother. So that really struck a chord with me because so many contactees I've talked to have enjoyed excellent health and go to the doctor and like, well, gosh, you have the lungs of an 18-year-old. And he's like, well, I'm 70. So I think there's something to that.
I think there's something to that as well, but I'm going to just put a little bit of a wrench in this, Preston, because you've got so much of all that's going on. I have to bring up the other scores of individuals that have talked about perhaps contracting illnesses after their contact encounters. So it begs the question when we say, and I say this all the time, when we say ET, we use that term colloquially, of course. Which ones? Perhaps there's a line or species, plural, that may not have our best interest at heart, where others that we're primarily focusing on are more invested in the evolution of our species. I believe for as long as I've been doing this that there's a spectrum. What do you say?
Well, I think there's certainly a bell curve. I don't think really any ETs are here to hurt, harm, scare, take over, or anything like that. I do know that some people have suffered negatively physically. Uh, Headaches, I'd say, was the thing I hear most following an encounter. And there are some people who believe their health has suffered as a result. Eye problems is probably at the top of the list there. And for those who get sick after an encounter, yes, this does happen because I think it can be very traumatic on the human body system. But I really think it's important to take a good close look at this because yes, illness may manifest, but can we directly correlate this to the encounter? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes ETs will show an interest in a person that's getting sick or about to. And I've looked deeply into this. I this is my assessment. I know there are researchers out there. David Jacobs is a good example who does excellent research and has really worked hard, but has a pretty negative viewpoint towards this.
Yeah, he's
Uh,
known for that. As did
Carla
Bud
Turner.
Hopkins. Bud Hopkins as well, for bless him.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I confronted him directly about this, and because he'd never written about healings, and I'm
Mm.
like, gosh, he's got to have them. Every major researcher does. He's like, oh yeah, we do. He says, I'm overall very encouraged because they seem to be very interested in things that are most lovely about being human. And some people do deal with these short little grays, who I think are AI and not emotional, and it causes them like, well, gosh, these guys have no feelings, no compassion.
Mm.
Well, essentially, that's kind of true. And those are the ones who, generally speaking, will lift a person up into a craft. But then they do have a person who's very nurturing and very much cares for them. This is why this field begs for more research.
It
But I'm going to
certainly does.
underline this objective research.
Objective research,
I
yeah.
can't tell you how many researchers who are on my naughty list because they're pushing a narrative. They're cherry picking and shoe fitting and pulling out cases. Like there's a couple of books out there. ETs are hostile. Or they're here to take. Well, of course I picked those books up, and I am not convinced.
Yeah.
The Travis Walton case was listed often by these people. Travis Walton himself feels his life was saved. They'll quote the Mantell case. Well, Mantell, I think, had an accident chasing a UFO, became hypoxic, and crashed his plane. I don't think this was an ET attacking him. And I'm very passionate about this because I've done the research. No, I don't think ETs are here to hurt us.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to impose our own belief systems, our own social mores, which aren't that healthy because it's stranger danger. We don't trust people. We don't trust each other.
Right.
And so when someone who's very different comes in, that's our first reaction.
I agree with you there. I absolutely agree with you there. I think that, first of all, yes, as long as we are in this human suit, we are subject by default to interpretation and to ego sort of driving the ship, forgive the term. But when you speak, Preston, of objective research, we absolutely need that. But what I hope that we see are more researchers coming forward that are willing to talk about the spectrum of scenarios that are out there, to your point, and not adopting a narrative and just running with it. And it's my way or the highway. We need to look. I always say, I'm a glass half full person, but I say in terms of what we call the negative experiences or encounters and positive, in order to know how we can't know how bright the light can be unless we're willing to glimpse the shadow of whatever it is. That includes this encounter phenomenon. So, but be objective about it and not go with a certain hypothesis and just stick with it at all cost.
Yeah, I've been accused of being Pollyannish about this. And I'm like, no, this is not true. I am very objective in the reporting. This is a person's story. It's not my job to interpret it. I report events as factually as I can.
Yeah.
Vetted stories. And if you go through my books, you will see people who had a real hard time with it. But none of them, I won't say none, there's two. One guy thought for sure this is demonic. But he was MyLabbed. You know about MyLabs. He admits it. He was in the military. It was a real hard experience for him. Another guy from England who's gotten wonderful things out of his encounters says he just doesn't like it. It's the loss of control, I think, that really affects a lot of people, especially if they're coming for their children. This is very, very difficult for contactees. Yeah. Some feel like, no, I did not agree to this. But many, many do believe they agreed to this.
Under regression, it will be determined that they did agree to it. Yes.
Yeah. So this is why research is so important. And again, objective research.
Yeah. For sure.
Wow. Yeah. I think if they really wanted to hurt us, even Carla Turner said that, who takes a negative viewpoint. She's like, they're not here to take over. And I think she dealt with a lot of the military aspect of this as well. So
she did.
A good number of her clients were clearly MyLabbed. Yeah. And what happens is people are a genuine contactee having experiences, and our secret government, for lack of a better word, comes in, swoops in, and muddies the waters and makes them fear ETs by giving them an encounter that is in essence not ET. It's full of fear, hypnosis, drugs, psychotronic
I think
technology.
that's happening for
And
sure. I do.
that's a
Yeah. I
problem.
yeah, I do think there's just again a spectrum of scenarios that we tend to want to put under one broad bucket called and calling it ET. I'm actually loath to even use the term ET. Now it's NHI, but nonetheless, it's we have
Yeah.
a long way to go, but we're getting there. We have a couple more stories to go, guys, and I want us to get to what I'm calling uh, the bombshell. I'm going to call it the bombshell. We're going to leave it. It's a bit controversial, but let's move on, Preston. I want to talk about Geneva Sterling. Tell us her story and how it started with missing a camping trip when she was quite young. There was a girls' camping trip that I guess she was supposed to go on, wasn't there. They reported to her that they saw a UFO, and after that, what happened?
Yeah, I absolutely adore Geneva. She heard me speak in California years and years ago, and many years later, it's like, I'm ready to tell my story. It's a journey for a lot of people. And freshly out of high school, I believe it was, they, she and her classmates decided to celebrate away from adults by going up to the Santa Clarita Mountains where there was an abandoned helicopter pad. And they're all there having a good time when suddenly people start shouting out, "Oh my God, look at that UFO." Poor Geneva was facing the other direction. And by the time she turned around, she didn't get to see it. She was so disappointed and actually went up there several times hoping to see UFOs and never did. But finally, an experience happened to her that was off the charts amazing. She was having a hard time with her life. That events piled up, and she was a bit depressed. Had a huge fight with her boyfriend, and was just having a little bit of a difficult time, as we all do. And decided that she was going to take a camping trip, spontaneous, up to this helicopter pad out in the Santa Clarita Mountains. It's quite remote. There's no lights around there. I located the exact location and went up there alone with a sleeping bag, some food and water. Laid out her sleeping bag and decided to do what they call primal scream therapy. Her coworker had told her about this and said it helped him a lot. And in essence, it's just shouting out your grievances at the universe at the top of your lungs and using all the swear words or whatever will help you, get rid of your stress. It's a
Sure.
wonderful therapy, right? That's apparently quite effective. I want to try it one of these days.
I think
I've
I've
never,
done that before, actually. I didn't know it had a name.
yeah,
Actually
primal
have.
scream therapy. So she's doing this. She's shouting out, why is life so, using all these bad words and just letting out her stress. She said it did make her feel better. And suddenly she sees this light off in the distance rise up from behind a hill, drop back down, rise back up again, and start coming towards her. And her thought is, oh no, someone's heard me. I don't know how I'm out in the mountains here, but someone's clearly heard me screaming my butt off in agony, and they've sent out a helicopter. How are they going to find me? But it was coming right towards her, and she's like, "Gosh, this is definitely coming towards me. This is, she's thinking, I'm going to have to get out of here. Somebody's called the police. This is what's going on in her mind when this object just gets closer and closer and closer, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is not making any sound. There are no conventional lights on this thing. It was a ball of light that was actually quite beautiful and pearlescent. And it came right down, maybe 200 feet and up right in front of her. And she could now hear a buzzing bees noise, a sound like buzzing bees. And she told me that. I'm like, oh, I've heard this before. And it sent down this beam of light and struck her. And it stayed on her for a minute or up to 5 minutes. She's really not sure. She collapsed to the ground, could not have been more terrified. She said, this is the end. I'm going to die. They're going to take me. Trembling. I mean, she was not able to stand up. The fear was that intense. The beam of light retracts, and this thing is still there. It's rocking back and forth, up and down, sideways slightly. And she's looking at it, it's like, are you going to abduct me? Who are you? What is this? Are you going to kill me? What's happening? And it just sat there. And bit by bit, her fear lessened. and at which point it would come closer, and her fear would rise up again and it would back off. And it slowly dawned on her, like, wow, they're not here to hurt me, or they would have done so by now, because this went on all night.
Yeah, I read that all night. Wow.
Can you imagine? I've never heard an encounter quite like this. And it just stayed there, and she had this conversation with it. Mostly one-sided, granted. She, kept asking questions and never got any answers. At one point, she thought she may have seen a humanoid form, but it was too indistinct. But she said this thing was so beautiful. It was shimmering, it was pearlescent. And she's going through everything she can possibly think that this might be. And really, it was open-minded enough to consider all possibilities, from angels to spirits to, she did not know. But definitely a UFO crossed her mind several times. And started to get light, and she's like, well, are you going to stay? Are you going to follow me home? What's going on? At which point it darted off, super high speed.
There's your answer. No, I'm out.
Her depression completely lifted. She knew that this was a truly profound experience. She screamed out to the universe. I call this a CE5. I do, because she called out for help, and help came.
Absolutely.
And it was really profound. And this changed her life and sent her on a journey of, spirituality and self-discovery. She started having dreams of being on board UFOs. I think this is probably a remembrance of what happened on that night.
Mm-hmm.
But she would, the floor would turn transparent. Another red flag for me, because they do this. She could see her main street where she lived in Ojai. And just started having all these, she'd wake up, dropped in bed right after one of these dreams. She's like, gosh, was that real? And finally, this was so interesting to me. She decided to take a remote viewing class.
I was about to ask you about the remote viewing. Yeah.
And this was, super fascinating. Remote viewing, of course, being mentally trying to see distant locations. And she took the class, and there was a bunch of students. And for one of the exercises, they each got to pick, an event or location, assign it a random number, put it in a sealed envelope. They jumbled all the envelopes up, and each one picked an envelope that, obviously wasn't their own. And so one of the students picked her envelope and did remote viewing, and immediately wrote down UFO, abducted, and proceeded to tell other details that were clearly, the mountains, and said, I see you going down to Mexico. Well, following this encounter, she had, this UFO dream that she had been taken down to Mexico and landed and talked to some kids and all of this stuff, which was so vivid. She knew it was more than a dream. So that was absolutely confirmation for her. She always wondered about it, always wanted another experience. One day
Has she had any?
She did. One day she was taking out the garbage and calling out, because she would call out to them, like, are you out there? Who's out? And boom, she heard that buzzing noise. She's like, I hear it. And then this beam of light came down, flashed on her for just a second, and took off. She got that wonderful feeling and waited, called out to them. No, they had just come to say a quick hi, and clearly went away. And she had a young baby at the time. She couldn't stay outside.
Right. That's incredible. I have to, if I may just interject, Preston, then we're gonna get to the final story. There's something so profound to be said about when one is in a state of high, intense emotion. I have heard a variation of stories before, not to mention my own. We've all been at that point. Oftentimes it could be overwhelming grief or frustration, anger, but the intensity of the emotion seems to almost act like an energetic magnet for phenomena. I can tell you very briefly a story of my father. When my mother had passed, it was, I don't know, maybe a month or two, maybe a little longer, and he was going through intense grief, as well as I, but from a different perspective, as his spouse, losing his spouse. And I remember him telling me one day, I was calling out for your mother, and I was crying and I was screaming, and I could swear I heard a voice say, hun, because that's what my mom called my dad, hun. And there it was, and from that moment on, I've always asked the question, is there something very, very distinct that occurs when a human being emits such intense emotion that it can trigger these what we call otherworldly encounters, and a vast spectrum of them. So when I read the story about um, oh, help me with her name again, Geneva.
Geneva.
I have it right here with Geneva. I started to say Janine. When I read that story, I immediately thought of that and the primal scream therapy, and maybe we should all try that, guys. I mean, I think it's a good thing to do. I tell people when you're angry about something, go somewhere where you don't think you can be heard and scream. But could it be that emotion may have opened up a portal to outside of?
100%. I totally
Yeah.
agree, because I've got case
Okay.
after case of that, where a person will have lost a loved one, had a nasty breakup,
Yeah.
lost their job, had no direction, were profoundly depressed, addicted to drugs, suicidal. That's when they have an encounter. So there's absolute, and maybe not a UFO encounter, could be a ghostly visitation,
Absolutely. Well, in the
could
case
be
with my
out of
mother,
body experiences, a near death experience,
yes. Yeah.
um, you know, any
Some
modality, for lack of a better word, that
right.
leads people to a higher awareness. Because
Yes.
that is you crying out, this things need to change. And that window opens, that pathway becomes apparent.
Yeah.
And it leads to one guy had an encounter. The quit his relationship, quit his job, moved to Hawaii. His entire life changed. Sometimes it's a two-way street. An encounter wakes you up to the fact that you're not happy. One lady, after her encounter, she's like, I'm not happy with my husband. I'm not happy with my job.
Mm.
And she left both and started what life path that she knew she was supposed to go on. And when you're on the right track, the red carpet rolls out for you. Doors start opening. The synchronicities come pouring in. So there's absolutely something to what you're saying.
Wow. I'm thinking of some of my own experiences and others that I've heard of. So profound. So many things that we can extract from this conversation and these experiences, Preston. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let's get to our final story. I'm not going to say I saved the best for last. I'm going to say I saved what to me was probably the most profound and connected to the research that I've been doing of late, having to do with intergenerational contact. Richard Simon is this gentleman's name. I've heard you tell this story before, but I was so excited when I got to have a glance at the way you presented it in your book. So without further ado, and then the bombshell at the very end. I don't want to hype it up too much, but something quite confounding, let's just say, that I learned that I had not been aware of, that I want to share with all of you. So without further ado.
Yeah, I had hints of that bombshell, but we'll get to it. Richard Simon, yeah, a really interesting guy. He was 7 years old, 1974, living in, Ohio, I believe it was. And one day woke up, could not sleep after that, suffered from terrible insomnia, anxiety, kept having to check the windows and doors. Just a little 7-year-old boy, and having all this trouble sleeping overnight. And it really concerned his mother, Ines, as you can imagine. And they couldn't find a cause. He comes from a happy family. He has siblings, no history of abuse, nothing like that. So it didn't make any sense. And he just learned to live with it. When night rolled around, he would read books and clean his room and study and this sort of thing, and would take cat naps during the day. And they never did figure out what it was for years. Uh, he became a heavy smoker, but always stayed away from drugs and alcohol. Did have a missing time incident at age 21 while fishing with his friend off the coast of Lake Erie. A UFO showed up. The next thing they know, it's 2 a.m. This got in the newspapers, actually, and I found confirmation of this. So at any rate, he's 22 now, still suffering from insomnia, and his mom, Ines, decides she wants to quit smoking and found a hypnotist, Retha Martin, who's very experienced in treating, smoking and things like this using hypnotic regression or hypnotherapy. And Ines tells her son, Richard, you should come with me. Maybe she can help you with your insomnia. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that, Mom. She's like, I really want you to. You need to get this fixed. And I'll tell you what, I'll pay for it if you come. So he finally relented. Off they went together with back-to-back appointments to see Retha Martin. And Ines went first, went into the office privately, and Richard stayed in the waiting room and heard her crying and became concerned. She came out all teary-eyed, and he's like, what's wrong, Mom? And she wouldn't say, neither would the hypnotist, the doctor. She brought him into the room and asked him about his anxiety and insomnia, and he had no answers. She asked all the standard questions and said, okay, let's try hypnotherapy. Put him into a trance and simply asked one question: what's the source of your insomnia and anxiety? And that was enough to open the walls of memory, break down the walls of amnesia. And she did not lead him at all, is the point. And he has the recordings to prove this. He started seeing bright lights and then what we now know of as grays looking at him, and recalled this full-on onboard experience. And it turned out, of course, his mom did too. And make a long story short, he was pulled on board. There was 3 short grays, a mid-sized gray, and a very tall gray working on his stomach. It was quite scary for him, but the mid-sized gray would come up to him and say, what's wrong, child? And he says, I'm cold, I'm scared, I want to go home. And they said, well, we need to do this. You're okay. And he felt this incredible love from this being. And then it would step back and he'd get all scared again. And he heard this woman screaming, letting out curse words. If you heard him, I will F kill you. She was so disturbed. And that was, of course, his mother. He didn't quite realize it at the time. But she recalled the same thing, seeing her son on this table surrounded by grays, this very tall 7, 8 foot tall gray standing in the background. Said it would look at him and smile and tilt its head.
So she was seeing this. She was witnessing this. My gosh. So that was the screaming, not to cut you off, but just to connect the dots. That was the screaming that he heard when he realized he was on board craft. It was of the mother looking at him, watching what was going on.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. So they both share their details corroborated exactly.
Independently corroborated.
Yeah. They talked about this a lot on the drive home.
My goodness.
In essence, it was about a half an hour long experience. They were working on his stomach. Turned out later in life, he had an issue with his stomach, which he thinks was concerning them. And that's what they were looking at. He ultimately thinks that they were probably trying to heal him because it was a long-standing problem. But at any rate, that was the experience. He was 7 years old. And his mom's like, you know, son, when I was 7, I went out to collect eggs from the barn, from the farmhouse in Kentucky where she grew up. And I saw this thing standing in the barn. And he's like, well, what did you see, Mom? It wasn't human. I don't know. I turned and ran for my life. It scared her to death. But she, looking back in hindsight, she's like, that probably was an ET. Because back then there wasn't a whole lot, of talk about this. But she thinks probably was an ET. And both of them remarked on the fact that they were both 7 years old when they had, an encounter with ETs. So life went on for him. He married, he had kids, two daughters, and had a lot of psychic stuff. I mean, tremendous amount of clairvoyance and dreams that come true and precognition, to the point he didn't really like it because, it really kind of just threw a monkey wrench in reality for him. It's like, how do I know all this stuff? Everything from winning the lottery to car accidents to you name it. He would put them in envelopes to prove to people because they could not believe it. That's kind of an aside. But at any rate, his daughter is 7 years old and comes running into the room like that, with a horrible nosebleed. And that kept happening. He's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And he's watching TV one day, and it's the History Channel, and there's a gray alien on the screen. She's like, Daddy, that's who came into my room. That's who touched me on my nose. And he's like, oh my God, my mother, age 7, me at age 7, now my daughter.
At age 7.
So they were going to take her to the doctor to treat these nosebleeds. But first, they had a dental appointment. And here's where we get into this whole very interesting thing about implants. Because the dentist took an x-ray and became quite angry at Richard and said, you filled out these forms. You were supposed to tell us if your daughter has had surgery or any implants. And Richard's like, she hasn't. What are you talking about? And the dentist rather, said, well, yes, she has. What's this? And showed him an x-ray of her sinuses, which clearly showed about a ½ inch long rod with little, what looked like wires, embedded high up in her sinus. And the doctor said, no, he said, Richard, what's this? And the dentist is like, well, that's my question to you. And Richard was kind of joking, said, I don't know, alien implant? Well, the doctor did not laugh and kind of just shrugged. And he says, well, shouldn't we take this out? And the dentist was very dismissive, kind of casual about it, said, no, leave it in there. It's not hurting her. Why should we bother about this? Which Richard thought was an odd attitude to take. And he told the dentist that. And he says, well, if you're concerned, go to a doctor. Get another diagnosis. And so he did. He went to another doctor, and the doctor had the same attitude. It's like, well, no, it doesn't look normal. That's a foreign body. And Richard's like, well, shouldn't we take it out? And the doctor's like, well, she seems to be fine, right? Other than the nosebleeds, yes, which did stop. And the doctor didn't want to do anything about it and just kept dismissing it and didn't want to talk about it, to the point where it made Richard angry. He's like, fine, I'll go see another doctor if you're not going to help me. Because he was concerned, and naturally, as any parent would be. So he goes to a third doctor now, a dentist, a doctor, and now a third opinion, and shows the doctor the x-rays, because he obtained the x-rays. Just tell me, what is this? The doctor looked at him, looked up, looked at the x-ray, looked up at him with this really somber expression, and got up and closed the door to his office so that no one could hear, sat down at his desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a document. Now, this I have never heard before. I have to tell you, I've dealt with other people who've had implants and gone to the doctor, and the doctors were not cooperative. I mean, one man I had x-rays of an implant in his arm, saw the x-rays, went to get the x-rays from the doctor, and they were doctored, altered, erased. The doctor's like, here's the x-ray. And he's like, this is not the x-ray. So I was puzzled about that. And I've talked to doctors firsthand. I was like, yeah, we know about these things, foreign bodies. Another case, as a quick aside before we get into what happened here in the doctor's office with Richard, a teenager, his mom took him to the dentist. He's 14 years old, and there was an implant under his tooth. Dentists were absolutely freaked out. It turned out the prior dentist had seen this, didn't say anything, covered it up, wouldn't give the x-rays. She had a devil of a time getting the x-rays from them, got them, did send them to me. I send them to other doctors like, oh yeah, that's a foreign body. No way that's natural. So that was another whole ordeal of dealing with doctors and implants. It's a rare contactee who at some point doesn't go through something like this. Doctors are very puzzled, like, oh, you've had surgery, or what's this in your foot? Did you break your foot? And so on. So now getting back to Richard, and the doctor opens the drawer, pulls out this document and slides it across the desk and says these chilling words. I was given to this document by the government. All doctors get this. If you tell anyone I told you this, I will deny it. I could lose my license. And Richard looks at this document, which looks official to him, and it says basically, if you find any foreign body, any alien implant, I'm not sure they use that word, but any unknown object in a person's body, you are not to remove it. You are to leave it alone and take no action. And Richard turns to the doctor, is like, is this legit? And the doctor's like, as far as it's my understanding, all doctors get this. I've not been able to confirm this. So I'm not sure if the document says you're not even allowed to share this document or tell anybody.
Right.
I feel like this should be known. So this took me a bit by surprise, but I immediately started thinking of all the people I've talked to who've had trouble with their doctors when it comes to getting information or x-rays or treatment for these implants.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, Richard's a very credible guy. I'm still in touch with him. He's still giving me updates on his case.
How long ago was this that this revelation came to him about the doctor that confided in him?
Oh gosh, this was, it's in the book. It's, I believe, the early 2000s.
Okay, so a little bit of time has gone past. The other question I would have is, in this document, and maybe he didn't get this far with you, it apparently said it was given to him by the government, and it was a mandate not to, the mandate of secrecy, let's just put it that way. But did it happen to offer, if you've run into a case like this, do not speak about this at all, but report it to us? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I would have to ask him
yeah, that would, because it would seem like they would take an interest in, with all the other stuff notwithstanding, report it to us so they can be keeping track of, given all that they're.
Well, he wanted a copy of it, which of course the doctor's like, no. And
can I have a copy, please?
He was so shocked by it that, it was difficult for him to process it. And the doctor took it back pretty quick and said, there's a fine, I could lose my license, imprisonment, that all came up. So this is a serious matter. I would really love, anyone hearing this to see if they can find out more about this.
I would love that. Please do.
That's true.
Yeah.
No doctor has ever told me that, and I've talked to a few.
I know quite a few, and I don't know. Wow. It's causing me to think about a lot. We would love to hear from anybody that has any information, or if they have heard of this before, for that matter. This is a bombshell. I'd call it that. It just really, look, to me, Preston, what it does is more or less confirm how vested our governments, and I say governments plural because likely global governments, are in this entire phenomenon. They know a lot more than they're saying, that we know.
100%.
And they just, their cryptic way of going about it just eludes me. It just, I have no thoughts about that other than it's time to come clean, for sure. It's time to come clean. But this is a big one.
Another lady had an implant in her lung. She had developed tuberculosis at some point and had to be checked yearly. And one year went to the doctor and they're like, what is that in your lung? It was this little metallic looking ring. And she's like, I don't know. Or, did you swallow anything? Which made no sense anyway, because it wasn't in her stomach or esophagus or anything. And they said, well, there's no foreign body reaction. Your body seems to be fine with this, so we're just going to watch it. And it's still there as far as I know. I've lost touch with her. But man, oh man, it's the more I research implants, I think pretty much all contactees have them. Most don't know about them.
Yeah.
But Richard's story is so extraordinary because that daughter of his, 7 years old, grew up and had a child. And of course had UFOs hovering over her house. She's now in the Georgia area. And one day called up Richard and said, you're not going to believe this. My daughter, 7 years old, just said that there's a monkey man looking into her window at night. And Richard's like, a monkey man? What do you mean? He's like, well, you talk to her. And Richard talked to his granddaughter, age 7, and she described this bald-headed creature with large eyes who at one point actually came into her bedroom, she says, not just looking in the window. And he was very careful to, not scare her and just, get the story without putting too much emphasis on it, because she's 7.
They were all 7.
Also, that's 4 generations, Alexis.
4 generations of 7 years old. That
That-
really stunning.
Yeah, which, boy, if
Right.
Ines only was able to ask her mother and grandmother, we could track this back, much farther.
Sure.
It's so important, I never talked to my grandparents about this. My
Yeah.
my mom passed away early. My father wouldn't touch the subject with a 10-foot pole.
Mm,
So I would encourage people, I always ask this of contactees. Tell me about your parents. Have they had contact? Have they had their
absolutely.
parents?
Yeah.
Because you will see this is generational,
No
almost
question.
always.
Yeah. Well, like I said, this is going to be the topic. I'm going to talk about this for a minute because Preston was such an integral part of my research for intergenerational contact and looking at the bloodlines and the why of it all. But most importantly, Preston, why I'm doing this is because of what I believe to be the scores of families out there in which this is the case, but they're not talking about it. They're either denying it or acting like it never happened. And could it be one of the reasons for the extreme dysfunction that is ubiquitous in so many families? That's really my drive, where I'm driving with this. But we'll be going through a whole litany of things, not the least of which are the amazing input that you had on this presentation and the research that I've done to bring this to that conclusion. What might we do? And thank you for saying that. I so appreciate your emphasizing how important it is to inquire and have the courage, if nothing else, not just for curiosity, but for healing. That's what this is all about. So I want to thank you so much for the stellar work that you've done and the authenticity that you've brought, Preston Dennett, to this work that is so needed in excess. So I want to thank you on behalf of everyone. We're going to wind it down. Listen, guys, we are going to the after show. I'm going to put up my. I don't know if y'all are noticing the new digs we got going on here. Get a little video background. I hope. Let me know if the like, share, and subscribe, which I want you to do, is annoying or not. Because if it is, I'll take it off. But hopefully you got the hint. We want to make sure you like. I'm going to turn it off now. Let's turn off that ticker. Now I want you to see this. Watch the after show on Patreon. Join the journey on Patreon because we do after shows after every episode, and today's no exception. Preston, you and I are going to talk about OBEs, out of body experiences, and the contact phenomenon and the incredible connection that you've discovered there. So we won't have you go into it now. We're going to do that on the after show. So any final thoughts, any closing thoughts, not to mention, y'all better get this book. Now, I'm going to have a link below for you to get this incredible book. Here's a quick question. Why
Yeah.
did you say humanoids and high strangeness versus humans and high strangeness?
We're all humanoids. I want to make it clear
Okay,
that I think
fair
we're
enough.
very closely related to these ETs. It's a message, as I said earlier, we are all one. We share a common heritage. But let's face it, we don't fully understand who these guys are, where they come from, why they're here, all of this. I think we've actually got a pretty good handle on it, but there's still so many questions surrounding the subject. And to me, the high strangeness is important because this is often edited out of so many accounts, particularly researchers who are very interested in proving this to people
No doubt.
and have a nuts and bolts attitude. And I
Mhm.
know it's censored out of people's accounts because I've been told this by people whose accounts appear in other researchers' books. I think it's a mistake. I really wanted to embrace the whole gestalt or all of what goes on with a contactee. It's not solely about extraterrestrial contact. It's
Mhm.
about the psychic awakening, the spiritual awakening, and all these other events that are absolutely an integral part of this.
Absolutely.
It's as a higher journey. So yeah, thanks
Yeah.
for letting us take this higher journey
Oh,
and
wow.
hoping other people come along and realize this, that it is a part of a spectrum of
I
events.
That's the word, spectrum. I'm so glad you said that. Oh my gosh. Guys, this is what it's all about, is it not? There is no other discussion to me and to Preston, and I'm probably to all of you watching that's more important than this. I'll say this for the record as we're recording this. You know what's going on right now, Preston? Begins with a D, ends with a C. The Diddy case. And as tempting as it may be to want to tune in and keep up with, and there's some important things to be, I'm sure, extracted from that. This is the conversation, because you know what? Once there is full disclosure and full revelation, is what I like to think of it as, insofar as this subject is concerned, everything else pales by default. I don't care what the breaking news is.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
It'll be a life changer for sure.
It'll be a life changer. Let's hope we're close. I do feel I've been saying for years we're on the precipice, but I'm going to say with a capital P, just like Preston Dennett. Preston, my friend, thank you so much. It's just been an honor to have you on board. And I certainly hope you'll come back and keep us up to date with what's happening. Listen, do you have a website? Where can people find you and get all the goods on Preston Dennett?
Yeah, I'm all over social media. I'm very easy to find. Just punch in my name. It'll take you probably to my website, prestondennett.weebly.com. But I'm on Facebook and Instagram and X, Twitter, a lot of the social media platforms. You can find my books on Amazon. I do a YouTube channel as well, putting out my research, because some people don't have time to read. I got Audible books too, including this latest one just recently on Audible.
You know what I think I'm going to do, guys? Because Preston has, this is a library. Let's start a Preston Dennett library. I'm going to put your authors page so people can go right and look at all of your books, obviously with the latest Humanoids and High Strangeness, but all of them. And I think it would be well worth it to at least grab a few and start the research journey if you haven't already. And maybe some of you have some of Preston's books, but wow, what an addition to an already rich field you've added so integrally to. And I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, Preston, we'll see you soon. Don't hang up. We're going to go next door. See that right there? Can I do this here? See that right there? Watch the after show on Patreon, patreon.com/higher journeys. There you go. Let me know if you like the new digs and what you like to see different. Okay. These are the journey of your family. Oh, here's something I want to shout out. I'm going to shout out to someone that might be watching, and forgive me because I cannot recall your name, but I am going to do this. I'm going to say, I happen, Preston, to be doing a little shopping in Home Depot in my new home in South Carolina with my hubby, looking crazy because I was coming right out of the garden. And I hear someone kind of running, and we got in the car. The person kind of followed me to the car and said, "Excuse me, do I know you? You're Alexis Brooks." And I'm going, "Do I know you?" Now listen, this has happened to me just a couple times in an airport. But it turns out that she is a longtime journeyer. She was thrilled. She said, "I remember you talking about you lived in South Carolina. I had no idea it was here." And so I want to just shout out to this individual, lovely young lady who is a huge, not just fan of our show, but of the field, and very invested in this work. I could tell by her excitement and enthusiasm. So I want to just say hello. Maybe I'll see you at Home Depot or Lowe's sometime again, because and there are a lot during the summer for gardening stuff. So just wanted to share that. Oh my God, I love it. Gotta love our audience. They're just the most loving, not just open-minded, but heartfelt, loving, beautiful people. Those that are with us for the right reasons, and there are a lot of them. And I want to acknowledge you all. You are on a super high journey, not mine, but ours collectively. And Preston, I'm glad you're a part of that club too, man.
Thank you. We all do our part.
Yes, we do. Indeed. All right. Well, listen, going to sign off for now. We will see you next time. And hopefully next door, we're going to be talking about OBEs and encounters. We'll talk to you very soon. Take care.